Broadcasting straight to you from a large spaceship, currently flying over the Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Southern California, looking for Charles Bolden. He's the current head of NASA, by the way. I wonder what he does all day. Judging by the looks of it, I would say very little. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strange World, where the truth is often stranger than fiction. I'm your host, Mark Sargent, the creator of Flat Earth Clues, which propose that all of us are living inside a Truman Show enclosed structure, thousands of miles wide. Check it out at check it out at enclosedworld.com or just Google Flat Earth Clues. If you can't find it, you're factoring in the curvature of the Earth, and that just ain't gonna work. Special thanks this week to a couple people that sent me packages. One was from a Jim Weber, W-E-B-E-R. He sent me a box of chocolate chip cookies. Thank you very much. I shared them with some of my friends. And from Laura, who sent me a children's book that she and I were emailing about called Lucius, L-U-C-I-U-S, and the Storm, written by Kent Knowles, K-N-O-W-L-E-S. So thank you very much, Laura and Jim, for those great little things. Anyone wants to send me stuff, feel free to email me at msargent23@comcast.net. If there's something on your mind, something you want to share, pictures, cookies, whatever. I accept all packages. Tonight is not a mailbag show, believe it or not. We have a subject matter expert show. And who have we had so far in the past? I'm going to keep doing this until you guys get sick of me reading the list. But so far, we have had United States Navy missile instructor, United States Air Force navigator, a U.S. Marine Corps sniper instructor, United States Navy submarine chief, United States Army artillery radar operator, an Australian intelligence officer, an American flight instructor, an industrial engineer specializing in valves and seals, a career surveyor, an international shipping expert, a corporate travel agent, an air traffic controller, and a United States Army master gunner. That's 13 so far. Who is the 14th? Well, I'm going to tell you. The 14th is an aviation and ground training combat expert. His name is Steve Gamache, G-A-M-A-C-H-E. Don't send him any hate mail. Steve has a 45-year background in aviation and ground combat operations. He is a commercial pilot, a flight instructor, an air traffic controller, an aircraft mechanic, and technical inspector. After high school, Steve joined the Air Force and worked in NORAD as part of the air defense community and was operationally connected to the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, otherwise known as BMEWS. His degree is in aviation management. He has served as an airspace developer and ATC training office for the FAA. Steve is retired from the Army, where he was a sergeant major of the aviation training team, the Eagles, at the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, California. Steve had the unusual experience of serving as an enlisted Black Hawk pilot during Operation Desert Storm. He has vast knowledge of several military and enlisted Black Hawk pilots during Operation read that line again. He has vast knowledge of several military technologies, such as GPS and night vision devices. After retiring from the Army, he worked on the battle staff at the NTC, planning and directing combat training activities of up to 8,000 soldiers and vehicles. He transferred to Alaska as the project manager of a system similar to the one at the NTC. He has traveled across the Earth, conducting hundreds of operations and exercises for the U.S. and allied nations. He has spent most of his time overseas in the Middle East. So, all that being said, welcome, Steve, to the show.
Hey, Mark, what's up?
Not much, man. We've talked a few times already, getting ready for this show.
Yeah,
and it's been very, very interesting. I was so glad that you came forward and want to talk about this. So, first question on everybody's mind: how does somebody with this many different qualifications, especially in aviation, get into the flat Earth? What started you down the path?
I would think that the first question on anybody's mind is, how come this guy can't keep a job?
But well, you have jumped around, but I think it looked like it was all voluntary. So, yeah. Anything you want to add to that wonderful resume I read so far?
No, that's good. But this all started for me, Mark, over a course of years, I've observed things, right? Which I'll talk about some of these things.
Okay.
And some of them, the U.S. government gave me wonderful tools to observe them with.
Yeah.
And so I've always had questions, a lot of questions that have come up, mostly about is the Earth really spinning? And is it really circling around the sun?
Mm-hmm.
And that was always kind of the nature of my questions. But at the same time, I didn't dwell on that. I did not think about it all the time. There were times when, it struck me as odd, or I'd be speaking with somebody about these things like, hey, how come these stars don't move, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, I do like everybody else. I go to work, do my job so I can pay the rent, put food on the table.
Yeah.
And, don't crash one of these things or drive into something, get shot by somebody or something stupid like that.
Yeah.
So, and all of that actually takes a bit of concentration.
Sure.
But I'm a poor consumer of news. I only go to one place like the Drudge Report, right? And I check it out.
Yeah.
Because it's just a bunch of headlines and you just read through them and, some of them are funny. And if anything interests me, I'll click on it. Most of the stuff doesn't, but that's where I get my overview of the news of the day from.
Mm-hmm.
So about 9 months ago, I'm looking at the Drudge Report, and here's this headline that says, Saudi cleric says Earth does not spin. And I'm thinking, okay, what has this guy got to say? But by God, I wasn't going to click on that link, and I didn't. Because I didn't want to go down the stupid path.
Yeah.
And
it's too dumb to click on.
Right.
Yep.
And plus, I know these guys because I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East with, in various countries, both on a friendly and sometimes a rather unfriendly basis. But I know them, and I know they're actually really pretty nice people.
Okay.
So I wasn't going to mess with this guy. And so I go back day after day, and in Drudge Report, the longer it gets on, the further down the column it goes. Eventually, it ages off into oblivion.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing was right at the bottom, and I said, I can't let it go, man. I hit it. I clicked it. And here's, typical Saudi imam, they're all younger, and so was he, and he's, he has on his scholar's robe.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's in somewhere in the United Arab Emirates, and he's talking about, say, he got a question from the audience. Hey, what does the Earth spin? And I'm not sure whether someone was asking, does the Quran say it or something?
Yeah.
But he speaks in Arabic, and there's a translator, and the guy's saying, look, the Earth doesn't spin. And here's how we can tell. If you take off in an airplane and you're flying over to China,
mm-hmm.
then all you got to do is just get up in the air and just wait for the Earth to, spin to you and land, and you're right there.
The old argument, yeah.
Yeah. And conversely, if you're China and you're trying to come back home, well, you'll never make it.
Yeah.
That type argument.
Yeah.
He said, besides, don't believe everything that you see on television or hear from the United States about they went to the moon, because that was all kind of done in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And so I clicked off it. That was the end of it, although there was, a science discussion on the end of it, which I happen to disagree with. But, I thought about that for a while because I've done a fair amount of flying in my time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've flown airplanes and I've flown helicopters. So I'm pretty well up on that. And But the whole question of does the Earth spin came flooding back to me,
Yeah.
all based on what this guide said when I clicked on it. So I did a search on, just Google Earth spinning or something, spinning of the Earth. And I came across what I think is a very nice little presentation by Eric Dubay called 200 Proofs That the Earth is Not a Spinning Ball.
Yeah.
And that one got me. That one really, really got me. There's a lot of things in there. But the thing that he brought up in that presentation was that no matter how high you go, the horizon of the Earth rises to meet your eye.
Yeah.
And that one freaked me out. And the reason it freaked me out is because that's always been one of my little problematic things.
When you were flying.
Yeah. And I learned to fly before I learned to drive. My father was an Air Force fighter pilot.
Yeah.
And when I was in 7th grade is when he started teaching me to fly at a place called Langley Air Force Base. It's in Virginia in the Hampton Roads area near Norfolk.
Sure.
And they had a little aero club there, and so we'd go up, and he's teaching me to fly, which, I loved. Of course, it was great. Not like him. I mean, he was, to me, was always a little bit weird with this stuff. He was an old World War II fighter pilot, but he was like one of these guys that did this when he was like 19 years old, flying a P-47.
Oh, wow.
In combat in the Pacific, for his country. And, they all weighed, 135 pounds back then.
Sure.
And when he flew, it was like, this mystical thing to him, like, the lines of high flight are, running through his head as he's doing all this stuff. Not me, man. For me, it was just a way to get from point A to point B. And that's really remained true with me this whole time. It's not a mystical experience.
Sure.
But, so, we would be flying around and, teaching me to fly and stuff. And the thing that bothered me was that horizon never dropped. And no matter how high we went, first we're at 7,000 feet, then we're at 10,000 feet, and then later we go up to 12,500. And this horizon it looks the same. It never changes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can't figure that out. And I ask him about it. And he says, well, you can't see it fall because the Earth is too large.
Yeah, the Neil deGrasse Tyson argument. Yeah.
Yeah. And that bought it for me for a while.
Yeah.
And I went with that. Well, later in life, I became a flight instructor. And I'm teaching people to fly. And I get the same question from the students. And I'm giving the students the same answer that my father gave me when I was learning to fly. But I always did it with a level of reluctance, almost hesitatingly. And it would even, got to bugging me because student pilots do weird things with the airplane. You got to really watch them because they can stall that thing out. And then it's a bad day for everybody.
Yeah.
But that horizon, in all these unusual attitudes, especially on landing, and when you're putting on flaps and the nose is going down and stuff like this, that horizon is always there and it never changes. So back to 200 proofs that the Earth is not a spinning ball, is that suddenly I realized that either the Earth is flat or this thing is like huge, man.
Yeah.
Like 10 times what they're trying to tell us it is.
Yeah.
And because what you're seeing, why that horizon doesn't fall, is you're looking at, for all intents and purposes, an infinite plane that extends out in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it won't fall. So to me, I came to that conclusion. It's either super huge, not what we believe it to be, or it's a level plane.
Yeah.
And it could be in the vicinity of infinite.
Yeah.
So that was the day that, I'm singing like hallelujah to myself because this is a question I've had since I was 14 years old when I first was controlling one of these flying machines myself and wanting to know why it doesn't appear the way academically I believed it should appear if I was on a ball.
Yeah.
So, I stared at the globe long enough in school to know that when I picked my head up, that ball goes down.
Yeah.
And so that's what got me. But, the 200 proofs was okay, but for me, it was kind of trying to drink water out of a fire hose.
A lot of information.
Yeah. And real quick.
Yeah.
And so I turned to the Mark Sargent clues, which was
I wouldn't give that guy much credit.
yeah, he's all right.
Which is really dumbed down. Which is really
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is but I liked that for me. And the reason why I liked that was because it took me from step to step to step to step.
Yeah.
And that's what I needed because, you're talking about a lot of science here, a lot of geometry, astronomy, and all of these various studies, academic studies and practical studies. And so I wanted to take it slow. So I thought Flat Earth Clues was perfect.
Yeah.
To be quite honest. It was perfect for me.
Wonderful. That's great.
And so that's where those are the two things I cut my teeth on. Of course, I've seen a lot of stuff. I am on the subject, I should say.
Yeah.
And I am particularly fond of your subject matter expert
series.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something because, as you can tell from my intro, I know a little bit about a few things.
Yeah.
So I've dabbled in a lot of this stuff so that when you're talking about the Navy missile instructor, and he's talking about being able to radiate a target at 60 miles. Mm-hmm. That beam is a microwave beam. That is not bending around the earth.
Yeah.
So, these things, the Air Force Navigator, he was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And so it's...
And you also liked the Master Gunner.
I love the Master Gunner.
Yeah.
I like those guys because he underplayed himself, I thought.
He did.
They're an unusually gifted group of soldiers. They're actually, Mark, they're elite soldiers in the Army.
Wow.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
We don't hear a lot about them anymore or too much anymore because we don't use tanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But these guys they're specially selected. They've got to have a certain IQ. The military, at least the Army, has its own special word for IQ. Guys will know what it's called, GT. Mm-hmm. The GT score, that's general technical. They have to have a certain level of education and experience. And they go to a demanding academic, rigorous scientific school to learn their trade. Because they are expected to guide a unit at all levels into being able to put that first round out of the tube of that tank on target with deadly accuracy.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is the guy that fires first wins the fight.
Mm.
So this, there's not a whole lot of room for playing there, but he was really, really right on with the stuff that he was saying. I mean, I see them. Let me tell you how I got to know these jokers.
Sure.
I was in Germany. I was with a unit in Germany, and every 6 months we went to gunnery at a place called Grafenwehr. Mm-hmm. Anybody that's been over there knows that place. And they do the tank gunnery. And I was in an aviation unit. So in the unit I was in, it was the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. Our tanks were the premier combat vehicle, and the tank crews were the premier, elite soldiers within that unit, and the master gunners were the cream of the crop of those guys. Mm-hmm. And they'd go out every 6 months, would go out, and everybody qualifies on all their weapons. That's everything, from the pistol all the way up to the tanks and the Bradleys and the artillery and the Cobra. We had Cobra gunship helicopters back then. Mm-hmm. And the whole emphasis was on what they called Tank Table 8, okay, which is the crew qualification for this. Was a big deal, man. And that's where the crew gets in fight. And I saw these guys in action, and they put thousands and thousands of rounds down range. What I did, because I was an aviation puke, mm-hmm, they made me run the range for the tanker guys. And that's how I got to see all this stuff. But I learned about them, and they were amazing. And then later, it was Operation Desert Shield right before the war kicked off, the Gulf War.
Yeah.
And I was over there, of course, with my unit, same unit. And I'm wandering around by this tank, and he's up on the firing line getting ready to shoot. And, they're practicing. And that dude pulled the trigger on that thing, man, and I thought it was the second coming of Christ. And the tank commander happened to be up out of the hatch, and he saw me jump. And he's hollering down at me, hey, what's up? What? I didn't scare you, did I? I said, yeah, a little bit. I said, that was pretty loud, and then it was only then that I learned, Mark, that all those thousands of rounds that they fired at Grafenwehr wasn't even the real ammunition.
Oh, wow.
That was training ammunition. So what they were firing over there was the service stuff.
Yeah, not the good stuff.
Not the good stuff. So anyway, he's did a great job. And, the gunnery thing speaks to the spinning of the earth because of the so-called Coriolis effect.
Yeah.
And nobody takes that into consideration. Nobody. I had heard about the Coriolis effect as a flight instructor, but I'd heard it in different terms.
Yeah.
And these guys would all, well, I'm going to, after the break, I think we got a break coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, another minute or so. Do you want to pick up the Coriolis story then?
I do.
Okay.
And I also want to tell you about some radar stuff.
I was about to say, because I was, reading through the details of your resume. You've dealt with a lot of radar.
Yeah, a lot of radar.
Approach control radar, ground controlled approach radar, TRACON, which I dealt with a different person, seaplane tower, wonderful stuff.
Height finding radar.
Yeah.
That's the interesting one.
Height finding radar.
Height finding radar. I'll tell you how that works when we get back from the break. I'll tell you about that. That's a very interesting one.
Cool. Cool, that's great. Well, when we come back, we'll do a drawn out break here. When we come back from the break, we're going to continue our discussion with Steve, the aviation and ground training combat expert, retired, 45-year background in aviation and ground combat operations. Dealt with a lot of different systems, and he's gotten into flat Earth recently. Well, not necessarily recently, but over the last 9 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, and didn't contact me until less than a month ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to head off to break here, and we come back a little bit more with Steve.
Finally, it's time for updating adjustment. Are you ready? My last move yesterday was
Welcome back to Strange World. I'm your host, Mark Sargent, and with us is an aviation and ground training combat expert, part of the Subject Matter Expert series on Flat Earth. His name is Steve, and are you still with us, Steve?
Yep, I'm here, Mark.
Cool. Well, where we left off was you kind of getting into the Coriolis effect and what it means or does not mean to you.
Well, I first heard about Coriolis in my flying days, and it was never called effect. It was always called the Coriolis factor.
Ah.
And and I never called it the effect. I always knew it as the Coriolis factor.
Okay.
And it basically says that because of the spin of the Earth, the air in the northern hemisphere is deflected to the right, and in the southern hemisphere deflected to the left.
Mm-hmm.
You can read a lot about it. There is, and when you take your test for whatever your, private pilot, commercial pilot, airline transport pilot, there'll be a question in there on it. You just have to answer it right, correctly.
Yeah.
Saying deflects to the right. Okay, good. You got it. Nobody figures this stuff in. Nobody. I don't know.
And that would jibe with every other guest I've had.
Right.
Yeah, we've all heard of it, but nobody uses it in their 9-to-5 operations.
Not at all. But I mean, winds are critical in flying.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how large or how small your airplane is, it's even worse for helicopters.
Yeah.
But so everybody just gets the winds aloft forecast, and they, do their flight planning based on that. And there's nobody calculating in any kind of, spinning Earth deflection or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't occur. So they'll do their planning based on the winds aloft forecast for the altitude that they're flying at, and then they just make adjustments in the air as needed, which usually there's not a whole lot needed. In the adjustments, the forecasts are usually pretty accurate. So that's it. Nobody pays any attention to that.
So when you talk about you call it the Coriolis effect. I'm sorry, Coriolis factor.
Yes.
You agree pretty much with everybody else, which is it's something that is talked about. Everyone's heard of it, especially in professional and the military sectors, but it's just never used in, for example, all the guys that I was talking to, they were used it in firing solutions, everything from a sniper to through artillery up to a missile.
Yeah.
Not necessarily long range missile, but still a decent missile. It's just never factored into the firing solution.
Yeah, this Coriolis effect is something like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy, man.
It's just not there.
It ain't there.
Yeah.
You know about it, right? But
Yeah.
it's not there. You don't use it. Now, how I know about this
Mm-hmm.
is shooting. So I've done a lot of shooting
Okay.
in my my time.
Yeah.
And because shooting is critical to what we do in the Army. That's, what we're all about.
Yeah.
And accurate shooting is the best. And our best shooters are our snipers.
Mm-hmm.
and the best amongst the snipers. And I'm going to get it from the Navy SEALs here.
Go ahead.
The best snipers of the Marine Corps.
It's all right. They'll tout themselves as being that.
And those guys will. They wear Bill Blash uniforms, man.
Nice.
But you look in all of these manuals on, sniping, man, there's not one, that word Coriolis doesn't even appear in there.
Yeah.
And they have to take in all kinds of environmental factors. The biggest one is wind.
Mm-hmm.
But also they've got to be aware of humidity.
Sure.
Because the higher the humidity, the thinner the air, the farther the bullet goes, actually.
Yeah.
And the air pressure.
Yep.
They've got to calculate that stuff, or at least be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so these items are critical for these guys making their shot. Now, if you take a regular guy, say like me, or most of the guys that have been, all we're going to do, we're going to aim our rifle and we're going to point it at what we want to hit, and we're going to squeeze the trigger,
mm-hmm.
and hopefully we get a hit. Usually we do. I mean, we know what we're doing.
Sure.
Nobody is talking about, man, I let this thing fly and that earth is spinning. Let's see which way is it going, and it's going at this speed from what latitude, or,
exactly.
I'm at, and I got to lead this guy by 4 inches. All you're going to do is miss him by 4 inches.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen. You aim steady on, and you only lead him if he's moving.
Yeah.
And, you'll hit your target.
Yeah.
These snipers, the Army snipers, they're good. And there's kind of two classes. There's the sniper class, that's the upper division.
Mm-hmm.
And the lower division is what we call a squad designated marksman. And these guys are really, really well trained and well disciplined, along with the Marine Corps. And how can you can't say anything but praising for the SEALs. Remember those guys that took out those 6 Somali pirates, with the same shot out where the captain that had been kidnapped and was being held hostage in that lifeboat.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty, great.
Yeah.
Shooting. And but it's never mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, DARPA, I think everybody knows who DARPA is, the Defense Advanced Program Research Agency.
Yeah, Research Program Agency or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right. So they've got a program out, believe it or not, where you can steer a 50 caliber bullet that's fired out of a sniper rifle.
Sure.
One of these Barrett 50 caliber rifles.
Yep.
And so some of these, it's fiercely competitive, and some of these guys working on, and these scientists have tried to engineer the thing to have the Coriolis effect built into the aiming device that's on this thing. And they take into account all these tables of what's their GPS position relative to the latitude that they're at.
Yeah.
What's the magnetic heading of their gun target line.
Yeah.
Plus all the other atmospheric things, air pressure, air density.
Yeah, but if you're going to build in something, if you're going to put everything into a super scope, something you can guide a 50 caliber bullet, somebody's going to, say I'm sure it was the last thing they added. It's like, we might as well include the Coriolis effect because why not, right?
Right. And then they do, and they miss the target, and they're shooting at ranges of over a mile.
Yeah.
And if they take that out, they hit the target. And they're like scratching their head like, I don't figure this out. But, they are, like all of us, they're wedded to, they're married to what they've been taught.
Yeah.
And what is supposed to be theoretically correct.
Yeah.
And it's just baffling in that case that, this doesn't work.
Yeah, because
Should work.
if you pull out the Coriolis factor out of the aiming device and it works and you're hitting the target, then the first thing anyone's going to think, well, the math must have been wrong when we programmed it.
That's exactly right.
We obviously screwed it up somewhere.
The algorithm is incorrect.
Yeah.
They're digging in that thing for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Nobody uses this Coriolis thing.
Yeah.
We don't use it flying. We don't use it in our flight planning. Nothing, The shooters don't use it. Long-range shooters don't use it.
Yeah.
You'll hear every once in a while the artillery guys talk about it as though they use it.
Yeah.
But they don't figure it out. They'll say, well, it's factored into the AFATADS or whatever fire control system that they happen to be using at the time.
Sure.
But nobody actually sits there and figures it out.
No, and you probably heard me read statements from artillery guys in both Fallujah and Afghanistan who said yeah, because you have to do a manual backup to your automated targeting system.
Yep.
And they were watching these guys, and it's like it's not in there. It's not being used. And they both said the same thing that we kind of talked about. It's like, do you know what a pain in the ass that would be?
Yeah.
Just like, because one, it's not just at that point, it's not windage and elevation. It's like, hey, which way are we facing?
Right.
And where and what latitude are we at? Because if people who don't understand what we're talking about here, we're talking about the spinning of the Earth. If the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles at the equator, hey, that's great and fine. We all know that. But up in North America, it's only supposedly spinning at 700, less than that, 600 miles an hour.
Yeah, exactly right.
And
but that's quick enough.
Yeah, it's quick enough to should be able to alter a projectile.
Yeah,
and it's not factored in. And being that you fly so much, and I don't know why more people aren't getting this part. Planes are a projectile.
Yes.
I mean, they're way slower than a bullet, but some planes are actually faster than a bullet.
Yeah, some are.
I mean, so when does, if you believe that the Earth is spinning, then when does that take effect? When the SR-71 flies or faster, or why commercial airliners, 500 miles an hour?
Yeah, the other thing about this whole spinning thing that freaked me out was a bad admission on my part. I'm one of the guys in 5th grade that flushed this information the instant I passed the quiz on it.
Really?
Yeah, which was how fast does the Earth spin? How fast do we travel around the sun?
Yeah.
And this kind of stuff. And I looked into this in association with, looking into more of a geocentric model in a flat enclosed plane. And if you believe the sun-centered heliocentric teachings, then you come to realize, it's not a realization, it's being taught that the Earth spins at the equator at 1,040 miles an hour.
Yeah.
That is faster than the speed of sound.
Quite a bit faster.
And as a matter of fact, it's 1.35, the speed of sound.
Yeah.
That's faster than an F-18 flies at low altitude.
Yeah.
And, okay, then take that one step further. We are circling the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're doing that at like 66,000 miles an hour.
Yeah.
In order to make it around, based on what they say our distance is in 1 year. Oh, but here's the key. It's because this is not the nice little picture. I don't know if you remember the Jimmy Dean sausage commercial.
Okay, do tell.
It's the sausage breakfast guy, and he's the sun. It's this guy dressed up like the sun. Mm-hmm. So he goes to work one day, and all the planets are sitting around on their butt, and they're all out of energy, and
I think I do remember this commercial.
Yeah. And he says, you guys need a Jimmy Dean sauce breakfast sandwich. And he gives it to them, and then they're all nice, floating around in a nice little circle and
around
all in harmony. Yeah. Well, it ain't like that out there, man. Because we are our sun, and we're circling this thing, is shooting through our Milky Way galaxy at the speed of 500,000 miles an hour.
Yeah. A ridiculous amount of speed. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And we're so not only do we have to have the 66,000 miles an hour to get around it,
Yeah.
but we've got to pick up the 500,000 miles an hour forward speed of this sun going through this Milky Way galaxy.
Yeah.
Now, it gets worse than that. Because according to the new Big Bang theory, the universe is expanding outward.
Yeah.
And the way I like to envision this, because the way they'll talk to you about it, is that the universe is basically a balloon that's being blown up. And that all the galaxies and stars are on the skin of the outer skin of the balloon. And they're all expanding away. And inside the balloon is nothing.
Yeah.
But they'll talk quantum and dark matter and other things. But basically, that's what it is. Now, how this came to light was actually there's a group out there led by a guy by the name of Robert Sengenis, he's not a flat earther. He's a globe earth. He's like anti-flat earth.
Right. I know who you're talking about.
But he is totally geocentric.
Yeah, he's geocentric.
And he's got data, and it's like pretty much irrefutable, that says that, everything is moving away from us at a certain rate.
Yeah.
Which, you extrapolate it back, puts us at the center of the universe.
Yeah. That the Earth is the center of the universe. Yeah.
The Earth is the center of the universe.
Yep. And you're talking, and he helped produce a movie called The Principal.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yep. And that's fine. They've done great work. I'm not convinced about the globe aspect they are, and that's fine. He has to be, because some of his data is actually based on deep space probes. So he's wedded to that he can't get away from that, at least not right now.
Got it.
But this thing is expanding out at near the speed of light to get back to these incredible speeds.
Sure.
So, we've got to believe that we are traveling at near light speed, chasing our sun through a galaxy at 500,000 miles an hour while we're rotating around it at 66,000 miles an hour, and we ourselves are spinning at 1,040 miles an hour, and our hair barely gets rustled in the wind outside.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of motion.
That's a lot of motion. That is too much motion.
Yeah.
And
by the way, what you mentioned there, I didn't even think about this till you just mentioned it, which was, if the sun, because you've seen the corkscrew computer animation where the sun's flying through space, the whole solar system is spinning through space in a corkscrew fashion. What, if that was true, and we sent a long range satellite, that goes out in those gaps between, like Saturn and Jupiter, wouldn't, when there's no gravitational pull affecting that satellite from either of those bodies, wouldn't that satellite just drop off of that velocity like if you dropped a piece of paper out the window of a car?
Yeah, the best thing that would happen to that thing, Mark, it would become lost in space.
Yeah, we would just leave it. The solar system should just leave it behind, because there's unless somebody can explain how the gravity is pulling it along with us.
Right.
I mean, I could see it if you could say, well, if you're in the gravitational pull of this planet or this planet, but some of these planets, if you believe mainstream science, there's big gaps, big gaps where there's nothing. There's huge null points.
Right.
I mean, we have a null point between supposedly us and the moon, where things supposedly could stay out there forever. So how is that? How are you sending satellites out to Pluto?
Yeah, it's a good question. Pluto. I mean, that thing's 3.4 billion miles away.
Something to that effect. Yeah.
The battery hadn't gone down in 10 years.
Don't get me started there.
And that's one hell of a Wi-Fi antenna they got on that thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I lose cell phone reception if I walk down the block. And you're telling me that we sent back all those wonderful pictures of Pluto? Yeah.
Right. I can't skim Wi-Fi off my neighbors anymore if the wind blows hard here, man.
Nice.
But that's another thing with this stuff that just bothers me.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the Coriolis thing.
Mhm.
I want to talk about this height finding radar.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So everybody, I'm sure out there is familiar with radar because you've all seen, if nothing else, you've seen in the movies, a guy sitting at the scope with the sweep going around, and it, makes little dots on the screen, and those are airplanes.
Mhm.
But there's another kind of radar called height finding radar. Now, man, I used to think I was like the coolest dude on earth at one time
Okay.
because I joined the Air Force. I was 17. I wanted to be an air traffic controller, but I was too young. So they put me in this thing called aircraft control and warning, and that's how I got hooked up in this air defense, North American Air Defense Command and all of this.
Mhm.
And it's, like being a controller once you reach a certain stage, but it's not really. It's secondary. But I liked it. And I thought I was cool because I could sit there and I could watch the radar scope and I could see my face reflected in it. And I thought I looked good.
Okay.
But this is back in the day, man. This is like in 1970.
All right.
And you won't believe how advanced our technology was back then. It's really good.
Cool.
So I was at what they call a long-range radar site in a town called Baudette, Minnesota. Now, probably everybody's heard of International Falls because that's like the coldest place, always.
Uh-huh.
International Falls, Frostbite Falls, we called it.
Okay.
Well, Baudette is 70 miles west of there.
Okay.
And it's a radar site. And it's part of this big mosaic it's not anymore, where you've got coverage all over North America, Canada, all the way up into Alaska and even north of there.
Mhm.
And the system that was in place was called SAGE, like the spice.
Okay.
And that stood for semi-automatic ground environment. And there were regions of these things, and they were all over. And I was in this, upper central Midwest region called the 23rd NORAD region, and its headquarters was in Duluth.
Okay.
So my job, I'm a little airman, I've got just one little stripe. I go to this place, and I'm on the night shift, and they're teaching me to do my job. And you got the round radar scope. That's called a plane position indicator. And the range on this thing is 200 nautical miles. It's about 230 statute miles.
Yeah.
And so when you notice a radar track, a radar target comes up, there was a way to tag it. It wasn't just with a grease pencil or something. There was an electronic device that you could put a tag on that thing.
Okay.
And what that would do would be that would then transmit that data, the XY coordinates of it, down to Duluth, and it would appear on their mosaic radar screens. They weren't really radar. They're synthesized, really digitized.
Sure.
And then the next thing you did when you got that target was we had height finder radar. So this is a thing that, looks like if you take your hand and make it look like a C in a cup and just rock it up and down, and point it at something, that it's radiating radar energy out that way that you're pointing it. So what you do is you turn that thing onto the azimuth that your new radar track is at, and you find it on the height finding radar, and it'll be there. It's a line. It's up and down.
Okay.
You find it, and there was another electronic interface that we used to click it right in the middle of the radar target because the target actually occupies the width of the beam. So like the further away they are, the larger the targets are.
Sure.
And then you get the height, and that is automatically transmitted down to Duluth, and it's associated with that target. So that not only So down at the main control center, they're tracking that target by an internal designator. Oh, and they know how high it is, and they know how fast it's going because there's simple math, to figure out how fast it's going across the ground. And that's what we did. And that, was the big thing for all the little airmen to do. That was their job before they moved on to more complicated things. And while I was up there, on the night shift, there's not a lot going on, man. But there were some places nearby me, and I used to look at this all the time, and I'd mark them up. We called it marking them up. So from Baudette to Duluth, Minnesota is 150 nautical miles. Duluth was to the southeast. That to the northwest was a Canadian town called Winnipeg.
Okay.
And that was 120 nautical miles.
Okay.
And then Minneapolis, St. Paul was 220 miles south. It was out of our range, right?
Okay.
But we could see the traffic going in there, but it would drop off, off our scope.
Just before it got there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there was an Air Force base out to the west, 100 nautical miles west, called Grand Forks.
Yeah.
So, these things are, flying around, taking off, and I'm tagging these things coming off of Winnipeg, man. Excuse me.
Yeah.
And I getting their height. These things are like 120 nautical miles away, and I'm tagging them at 6,000 feet.
Okay. That's interesting.
But see, that never entered my mind.
Yeah.
Ever. Never entered my mind.
Wow. All right. Hey, when we come back, more about height radar with Steve, the aviation and ground training combat expert. Welcome back to Strange World Part 3. Subject Matter Day, and today we've got an aviation and ground training combat expert. Steve, are you still with us?
I'm here.
Cool. And where we left off, we left Lester.
We left off in Baudette, Minnesota.
That's up near the Iron Range, yeah?
Yeah, it is.
Up there near Duluth.
Yep, Duluth.
Yep. They do some black powder rifle championships up there.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's true. Anyway, so yeah, you were up in there and you were painting. You were tracking targets at 120 miles at about 6,000 feet.
Yeah,
which seems a little. And you're thinking, and people are saying, well, so what, right? Well, that's kind of a big deal if you're tracking them at 6,000 feet, because at 120 miles, that's you shouldn't be able to really see them.
I can't remember, Mark, if I ever saw them come off the ground or anything.
Yeah.
But I mean, you could see the Winnipeg airport, the traffic around there.
Interesting.
The same at the Duluth airport. There wasn't, these are not, big airports or anything, but you'd see the stuff. It was routine. These things going into Minneapolis, you see them coming from all over, except the south. You couldn't see to the south because the radar scope didn't go down that far, the range. But, I mean, you see them, and these guys, they're either on approach into Minneapolis, so they're out of 10,000 feet or lower, or they're climbing out. And, if they're near the area, they're not above 10, 12,000 feet. I mean, I never thought about it. I kind of ended before the breaks, and it never entered my mind that the curvature of the Earth has got anything to do with this.
Sure. Why would you think that?
Yeah, it never entered my mind because you're seeing the things right before your eyes, and you're working with it, so it's real.
Yeah. So since it's real, why would you think anything strange about it? It's like, oh, it's right there.
Well, I leave there and I go to Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Where their system was more antiquated than what we had in the United States. It was a really advanced system in the States. I was really impressed with it. They were sending this data over the telephone lines.
Wow.
This was in 1970, and it was already well developed. Wow. And that's long before we had our first commercial telephone modems.
Wow. I was about to say, I didn't even get my first modem until 89, 90.
Yeah. And there was a whole, certain skill Air Force skill that took care of this, patch panel, the telephone patch panel to transmit this data.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. Well, at any rate, I go to Alaska, and I had progressed in my development as, one of these NORAD operators.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually to the point where I was controlling the interceptor fighters that would go up. If there was ever an intercept that had to go up, then, this is just the opposite of an air traffic controller. Air traffic controller tries to keep airplanes apart.
Mm-hmm.
An intercept guy tries to run them together.
Yeah.
And but we had up there near where I was in Fairbanks at another long-range radar site called Murphy Dome.
Yeah.
Near Fairbanks. But just down to the south of us, between us and the Mount McKinley area, was a little Air Force station called Anderson Air Force Station, a little Alaska town called Clear, Clear.
Sure.
And they had the BMUS site there. Oh, this sounds cool, man. And what was that? Oh, that's over the horizon radar, boys. That stuff picks up missiles coming out of the Soviet Union if they're coming over here to, kill everybody's mothers and stuff.
Sure.
And all right. So this is called BMUS. It's the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System.
Okay.
And if you go down and look at the antennas, and I'd fly down there occasionally and look at them. They look like football fields that are turned up on their side.
They're really big.
They're huge. And they're facing to the north, up over the North Pole.
Sure.
And these things are capable of picking up. And, the story that I got, and I have, again, no reason to doubt this stuff, is that this is over-the-horizon radar. So it's unlike the other kind of radar I'd been using that's not over the horizon. This is straight line. But see, this stuff is all radar, and it's all microwave, and that stuff doesn't bend.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'll hear people talk about, they're bouncing it off the ionosphere. They're not. Because, you're getting a return on this thing.
Yeah.
And, you're not coming back.
You're not coming back through the ionosphere.
No, you're not coming back. You're going somewhere else because you're going to hit it at a completely different, part of the parabolic curve of the thing, if it exists.
Yeah.
So this stuff is looking out over a plane, and that's how it can see that stuff. And because of the tremendous power that it's emitting, it's got a long range to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, this stuff can see quite a distance. And that's what you're seeing. It's not over the horizon. It goes, these are straight waves. Mm-hmm. And they're going to propagate that. When I know these things now, I didn't know it back then, Mark.
Yeah.
Back then it's great. Hey, we got all this. And, if that BMUS goes off, man, you hit that red button. And I had my finger on that red button. Yeah. And if that button went, everything that we had launched. They had 15 minutes to get into the air.
Yeah, the scramble fighters.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it's for survivability, right?
Yep.
So never did hit it or any of that. We've had false alarms, but, anytime that thing went off, the red phone's ringing saying, false alarm,
Yeah.
So, but that was pretty interesting. And, that's the stuff about the radar that I've got. But I'd like to talk about, it's going to lead into GPS.
Okay.
Because we talk about GPS, well, it's the satellites that go around and they, tell us where we're at.
Yeah.
And that sounds good.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that what we're using and calling GPS is very, very accurate.
Sure.
Very accurate. Down to, it can tell you where you are on the face of the earth down to 1 meter.
Okay.
And so it's good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. But let's walk this dog back a little bit,
Okay.
because we kind of have the impression that everything that we've got nowadays is the best it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it is, but they had good stuff back in the day also. And what I'm thinking about is the Germans in World War II.
Okay.
The Germans, excuse me,
That's okay.
the Germans had a system that they used to guide their bombers over England and could mark the target to, drop the bombs at.
Mm-hmm.
And they called it Knickbein, which means crooked leg.
Okay.
So, hang on. So what they, people suspected this was there. Some of the British scientists,
Mm-hmm.
and Winston Churchill was really interested in it. He got personally involved in it, wanted to look at it. And other guys were saying, no, that can't happen, man, because of the curvature of the Earth.
Yeah.
No way. Well, they persisted, and Churchill finally got a couple of guys to get in an airplane and go look for this thing. And by God, they found it. So they found one of these beams, and they're following it. And they can follow it because they listened in their headset. It makes noises.
Sure.
Little dots and dashes.
Yeah.
And then when they're coming up on the other beam, they start hearing it. One's making dots and dashes. And when the beams merge, it's one solid tone.
Okay.
And that's when they release their bombs. So it turns out these guys look down and say, hey, there's a building down there, man. Get the address on that, right?
Yeah.
So they went and checked it out, and that was in a town called Derby. And the building they were over was the Rolls-Royce factory. And that was the factory, the only factory in England at the time that was making the Merlin aircraft engine.
Okay.
So this thing was for real.
Yeah.
So much for the curvature of the Earth, this thing not being able to go over it. Because their transmitters were, 400 miles away.
Yeah.
And, that I didn't actually do the math on this. Somebody can do it. But the typical altitude for a German bomber was between 13 and 15,000 feet.
Yeah.
But it was so bad that Churchill called their system headache. That was a code word he gave to it. And they developed countermeasures. It was pretty easy to do. It's all real low frequency stuff in the 30 megahertz. And the countermeasures was able to jam it, and they called the countermeasures aspirin, which I thought was typically British.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, this whole Knickbein or crooked leg system was developed by a company called Lorenz. And what the Lorenz had developed was a blind landing system. We would refer to that in the U.S. as the instrument landing system, or the localizer portion of an instrument landing system. It's a beam that you're able to connect to electronically, and you can follow it from your instruments down the center line of the runway, so that you'll, be able to find the runway in bad weather when you can't see it.
Okay.
So that's where this stuff came from. But it was developed further out, and the same company developed it. It was the same system, and they called it the ultra shortwave landing radio beacon. Ultra Kurzwellen Landfunkfehr, the way they'd say it.
Yeah.
They got to have 40 syllables for every word.
Yeah. German is not the most beautiful language in the world.
I know, but it's great though.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But that's what the U-boats used to navigate on, man. Was that? I mean, this thing went out for hundreds and hundreds of miles over the ocean. And this is back in 1942 that they're doing this.
So the Germans are breaking the rules already back in the 40s.
Yeah. Oh, big time.
Yeah.
And, they came to call this Electra. They made some refinements on it power wise, and they were able to get these distances, out to, over 1,000 kilometers. I don't know how many,
Yeah.
but I think it was around 1,400 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And they added, then it became the Sun Electra, the electric sun is what they called it. But I mean, this is how they navigated in the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Now, we used the same technology to develop LORAN. So that is another long-range navigation beacon system,
Yeah.
ground-based beacon system that I know for a fact has ranges that extend beyond 1,400 miles,
Wow.
not kilometers.
And the name's not too different, by the way.
Not too different from Lorentz.
From Lorenz, which is the
Right.
Germans, yeah.
And the Navy, I'm not sure if any of your Navy guys mentioned it, but they still use this. They've got a variant of it called DECA, DECCA, which it escapes me what that stands for.
Okay.
But I don't see why the old Loran DECA systems cannot be used for what we're calling GPS today.
Yeah.
Because, as you've noticed in great parts over the wide oceans and in the southern hemisphere, we don't have GPS coverage at all. And, as, the flight instructor from the Midwest says that it is lacking at certain parts in the Midwest all over the plains, or at least it's corrupted.
Yeah, there seems to be dead spots every once in a while.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what happens with Loran over the land. It gets corrupted over the land.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, it does. It's really best over the water.
Huh.
But here's what makes GPS work. It's not the satellites, assuming there are satellites.
Okay.
The satellites they're just broadcasting certain things. So they're broadcasting the almanac data, which, is telling them the number of the satellite, which it's a pseudo number anyway.
Yeah.
And then it's broadcasting the ephemeris data, which is the supposed rotation of the satellite in orbit.
Yeah.
But what it broadcasts is time. So it is just broadcasting a time pulse. That's what they're broadcasting.
Okay.
So your GPS receiver, whether that's your little Navi in your car or your Garmin handheld or your plugger military device, it's receiving the time from these various inputs, and it's the device itself that makes the calculation where it's at.
Okay.
The satellites don't tell you where you're at. The device does.
Okay.
Why that's important is because in order to get the level of computing power that's needed to get to the accuracy to be, able to pinpoint your location within 1 meter on the face of this earth would take a building back in World War II, the size of a warehouse.
Sure.
But now they're on these little chips. They're on these tiny little chips, the biggest of which are the size of a business card.
Yeah.
That has got all of this computing power and all of this interoperability with it, with the various technologies and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So it seems to me if they can find the Rolls-Royce, Merlin engine factory, they can find you out in the middle of the woods with one of these things.
Sure.
So I'm not convinced about GPS. I think it's wonderful. I think it works. If you got GPS, use it because it's great. I know it's good stuff. Just not real convinced that it's coming from satellites.
Yeah. So not just, and I've had to correct myself. Initially, I'd said it was like 24 satellites.
There's
And
36.
It's 36, and they're supposedly all at about 15,000 miles,
They are at
roughly 20,000 kilometers.
they're actually supposed to be at 22,000 miles.
Oh, okay.
That's the government. Now there's another constellation of GPS satellites, and they are called. I'm looking at my box here.
Yeah.
The Iridium. The Iridium satellite constellation, that's at 15.
Yeah. At 15,000 miles?
Yeah, so that's in lower Earth orbit.
Well, both of those, not to go off on a tangent, but both of those constellations that you mentioned, those constellation of satellites, put them smack dab in the middle of the outer Van Allen belts, if those are real.
Yeah.
Which
and,
makes it
in the tropopause.
Yeah.
So, that's another thing that bothers me. I didn't even know there was a tropopause. I mean, I knew it enough to write it on my paper, the outer ring, that one's the tropopause.
Mm-hmm.
But, temperatures get exceedingly high up there.
Yeah.
And
if you believe mainstream, yeah.
Right. And so there's not molecular adhesion up there for any kind of heat to even be recorded.
Oh, wait. We should back up just a sec because people don't know what we're talking about. The question is there are satellites hanging out in a layer of the atmosphere called the thermosphere, and temperatures in the thermosphere, if you believe mainstream science, can break 4,000 degrees. And their argument is that the molecules are spread out so far that it's like getting hit with the wind's moving really fast, but there's not that much air. There's not many molecules in the wind, so you're not getting hit with much. But your argument is,
my argument is those molecules that make up those satellites are pretty close together.
Yes, they are.
They ought to be heating up pretty good.
I would think so.
So I don't know what's going on with that stuff. And, it's like some guy said, and I thought it was just real funny, NASA stands for never a straight answer.
Yeah.
And that was, you can't get it out of them.
Yeah.
But I question the satellite thing. But that brings me to night vision goggles, because I have spent thousands of hours looking through night vision goggles. I fly with them. I have flown with them. I drive with them. I used to drive a Humvee in the middle of the Mojave Desert at 70 miles an hour with no lights, in formation with 3 other Humvees, using these NVGs.
Oh, neat.
It was cool as hell.
I bet.
Ruined my back. But, I mean, you can see clearly, but it's like, everything's shades of green.
Yeah.
And there's some, little things. There's no depth perception to them. So you got to kind of watch that. It's like if you're hovering in a helicopter and you're looking down and you see an object down there and you think it's a 55-gallon drum and you're at 50 feet. It may be, a can of soup and you're at 5 feet.
Yeah.
So it's
you lose some perspective.
Yeah, because you lose your binocular visions.
Yeah.
At any rate, you see, most people that use NVGs don't have time to do anything except their job, whatever it is they're doing under those NVGs. Like if you take an Army helicopter pilot, like Rob Skiba, that dude is not looking at the stars, man.
Yeah.
Because he is flying in the trees at 120 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So, if he sneezes wrong.
Yeah, he could screw everything up.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that's all they're doing. And they do that for like 3 hours at a time. Then they land and get another bag of gas, and they do it for 3 hours more before they go home.
Yeah.
They're not interested in looking at the stars. But I had this job there at the National Training Center where I would be out all by myself at times, and I didn't have anything to do but put on those goggles and look up at the stars.
Okay.
And the things I saw, Mark, blew my mind, man.
Do tell.
Because I'm in total darkness, number one.
Yeah.
And so the stars are like, really bright. Milky Way's there.
No city lights to distort anything. Yeah.
Nothing. The lights in Las Vegas were on the far horizon. It was just a little dim glow.
Sure.
And you look up there, and there are millions and millions and millions of stars. It's much. I mean, you look. So if you're like looking at the constellation Orion, and you put your goggles on, you lose the constellation. There's so many stars. It's like, where'd Orion go? And the Milky Way is blinding to look at it.
Wow.
But if you look at this stuff for a little while, all of a sudden, some of these things start moving, man. They're moving around. There's movement up there. And it's like they're stars, but they're moving. I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
But they're moving, and you'll see them move. And a lot of times they just like move in a straight line.
Yeah. A lot of times it seems like they're just going from point A to point B.
Right.
At least for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
And then at other times they will make 120-degree turns, and they are smoking.
Yeah.
They're moving out.
Yeah.
And other times they're flying in formation.
Yeah.
And they're moving all around.
Yeah.
And I think, what are those things? They could be satellites, right?
Well, that's what I thought at first, but then they started doing non-standard satellite stuff. I'll tell you what, we gotta jump to a break here in a second, and then we'll come back for our last segment with Steve, the aviation and combat training expert. This is part of our subject matter expert series. Steve is expert number 14. What else? So when we come back, we're going to talk about night vision. What else do you want to get into after we come back?
Just like more examples of distance.
Cool. Welcome back to Strange World, the last segment, part of our subject matter expert series. And we've got Steve, the aviation and ground training combat expert. Oh, and just in case you thought I forgot, that was Joe Jackson stepping out from his album Night and Day. So, Steve, where we left off was things flying in the sky. You were looking with night vision and thought that there was stuff moving around. It registered to you, and because I did the same thing for several years. And there was a lot of stuff up there that didn't look like lights to me.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, at a certain point, I've got to kind of make a little confession here.
Sure.
I hold a Christian worldview.
Okay.
And so I believe in beings called angels.
Sure.
And I believe that could be the explanation for some of that we see up there.
Could be. Rob Skiba touched on it. The Book of Enoch, and in fact, a bunch of people have already talked about where those could be the heavenly luminaries. Why not?
Yeah, it could be.
The stars could be living things.
Yeah, it could be. All right, moving on.
Sure.
I wanted to go to Australia all my life, and I finally got a chance to go there once.
Okay.
And it's in the capacity of doing one of these huge military exercises, a huge multi-nation exercise that they hold down there in Queensland by the Great Barrier Reef.
Oh, neat.
And so I'm all ready to go. And I was actually coming from Alaska going down there. First time in Australia, first time in the Southern Hemisphere and all of that. Mm-hmm. And I had a little counterpart down there set up for me, this Australian Sergeant Major.
Okay.
And so we're in the control room. And again, this is one where we're using GPS to track people and vehicles and ships in a vast training scenario. So, all right, I'm all good to go down there because the big thing I wanted to do was, all right, see how these Aussies do it, pointing that compass at the South Pole because I figured that's what they'd be doing down there, right? Mm-hmm. So that's like the first thing, after I met my counterpart down there was, all right, how do we navigate, using the South Pole? And the guy looked at me and he goes, there ain't no South Pole, mate. I go, what? He goes, there ain't no South Pole. I says, well, how do you all get around? He goes, well, we either drive or walk or fly. I says, how do you navigate? He goes, we navigate off the North Pole. I said, what? And that was another like staggering thing for me. It's like I would think because they're close to the South Pole that they're using the South Pole, all of its grid references
Yeah.
to that because we had to register the map series that we're using into the computers. We've got to set the electronic boundaries for these GPS tracks to appear within and all of this. It goes, just do it the way you normally do. We all navigate to the North Pole. And they do. Land, sea, and air. So they use the identical compass that our soldiers use navigating on the land. They've got the same Black Hawk helicopter that we've got in the air, and they've got the same class of destroyers that our Navy has, and they all navigate to and from relative to the magnetic north. It's like the South Pole doesn't
exist. Yeah. Yeah, and several people have asked that. And that question has come to me for months, which is when do you get to the point when you're traveling south to when the South Pole takes over? And your guy, who is about as close as you're going to get to the South Pole, says it never takes over.
That's right.
Ever.
And, an advanced, culture further south is New Zealanders. It's the same with them.
Yeah. That should raise some red flags, you would think.
Should. That's another thing. I happen to know some guys from New Zealand. When they fly to California, it takes them a day. 24 hours or more. I think you brought that up in one of your clues.
I may have. Well, not that one specifically.
Yeah.
But that's interesting.
Yeah. Says, hey, you just can't get a flight. It's got to go this way. Yeah. I forget where all they tell me they stop in these oddball places.
Yeah. The big ones that I always noticed was when you're going to, like, for example, if you're going from Sydney to Rio, you'd think you just go east to west or west to east, depending which way you're going, across the ocean down there. But it doesn't. It goes north. And it goes all the way to like Los Angeles and San Francisco, and is like in this huge arc. And I don't care if you're using the Mercator map or if you're using a globe model; it doesn't make any sense. People go, "Oh, you're picking up people." I was going, "No, you're not," because aircraft, their main, this. I mean, the whole point is pounds of fuel. Pounds of fuel is money. You don't spend an entire plane load worth of fuel just to pick up people that can't pay for the fuel.
So much so, Mark. Yeah. That point you just made that. In oceanic air traffic control, the routes that the controllers put the aircraft on, actually, they calculate where the winds are at certain altitudes, and they put the aircraft in the wind streams so that they will get the greatest amount of ground speed out of going in the winds, just to save fuel.
Yeah.
No, it's a safety thing.
Yep.
And that's kind of, one of the principles of oceanic air traffic control.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I've never done it, but, it's just kind of, I know guys that have.
Interesting.
Could I talk about deception a little bit?
You absolutely can talk about deception. You kidding? You want? It's your last segment, by the way, so you have to.
Yeah.
Get out. Go ahead.
Well, I'm interested in deception because I do it a lot.
Okay.
And I do it honestly. I'm an honest deceiver.
That's a t-shirt right there.
Right. We do deception every time we make a military plan. Every time. Deception is always a factor. If you plan something without regards to deception, then you have failed.
Yeah, it's not like the old days where it was a straight-up fight.
Right.
Now it's all about perception of fight.
But even in the old days, they did it masterfully. One of the greatest military deception, in my opinion, is the Normandy invasions on D-Day. Because the Germans thought that the Allied forces would cross from England over to the Pas de Calais, which was the shortest little section between the two.
Sure.
When really they went down quite a bit further south and landed in Normandy. And they really fooled the Germans. The Germans had forces up there. They did not think that the Normandy landing was the real one. They thought it was a fake landing. But the principle behind it that Eisenhower employed, at least he's given credit for it, he says, you got to make them believe what they want to believe anyway. So the Germans wanted to believe that the Allies would come across, the shortest distance across the channel.
Yeah.
And they did all kinds of things. They had little blow-up
tanks,
all of that. And, they'd put Patton up, and they had a headquarters element up there, and they were doing all these radio calls, and made it sound real and so on. And, they were doing bombings up there. So they deceived them, and that was deliberate.
Yeah.
Here's another one we do in Army aviation a lot. One of the problems with Army aviation is we fly low, real low, and so we're vulnerable to ground fire, like small arms even. And we're loud. We make a lot of noise.
Okay.
So one of the things that we do is we fire artillery ahead of the aircraft that are going into a place, and it's called suppression of enemy air defenses.
Sure.
But there's one thing we do also. It's called deception seed, deception suppression of enemy. So we'll fire artillery along a path in a way we're not going, so that the enemy thinks that they're going down by the by the Red Barn area, and when really we're not. We're coming up through the cornfield.
Sure.
So this deception is something you plan everything. Even if you don't try to deceive, you've got a plan for the enemy to try to deceive you.
Yeah.
And I've got a friend who's a master at this. He's an old special forces guy. Mm-hmm. But, that we always plan, when we're looking at the enemy, what is their most probable course of action, their least probable course of action, and their most dangerous course of action. Okay. Meaning most dangerous to themselves, not to us.
Yeah.
So deception is something that is a practiced art, and we do it all the time.
Okay.
So there's no reason to think that we're not being deceived. Because I'll hear people say, they can't deceive us that much. Yes, they can.
Yeah. We
are easy to fool, but human beings are exceptionally easy to deceive.
Agreed.
And it's because, my opinion, again, I'm getting opinionated now.
Yeah.
It's because we're childlike, all of us. Yeah. We expect that our leaders are telling us the truth. Why would they not?
Yeah.
We expect that the more educated among us would, offer us their knowledge without malice or bad intent.
Yeah.
Why would we not? And my famous one that always stuck with me was, I've got, my wife and I have 3 children, and when they were little ones, we told them about Santa Claus, but we told them Santa Claus wasn't real.
Yeah.
And because we didn't, again, here's a kind of a Christian thing. When it came time for me to tell them the story about Jesus Christ, I didn't want them to believe that Jesus might not be real because they got fooled by Santa Claus.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Right?
Yeah.
So we'd tell them, hey, Santa Claus is not real, but let's play Santa Claus. And they all knew it. They all knew Santa Claus wasn't real. And I'm figuring, okay, I'm set. So one Christmas, and we were living in Anchorage, Alaska, I had taken and did like footprints, with a boot coming out of the fireplace.
Sure.
Right? Leading up to the table where the milk's half drank and the cookies.
Yeah, my parents did some of that, yeah.
And I like my kids, hook, line, and sinker. They bought it, man. They bought it. They were even embellishing that they heard him on the roof.
Sure.
And it was for like 3 years after that, I couldn't tell them that Santa Claus wasn't real. They believed it.
Yeah.
And of course, that wasn't my intent. I was just trying to have fun.
Yeah.
But I deceived them, and it was deliberate.
Yeah.
And it can be done, and we do it all the time. You'll hear these ones, and this is a common countermeasure to people that think like us, is that, you can't keep secrets from this mass of people like this. Well, sure you can.
Sure you can.
And I've got plenty of examples. Look at the Manhattan Project.
There you go.
I saw something on one of the History Channels where there was this gal, and she worked at Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Yeah, that was one of the refining plants. Yeah.
Exactly. And she sat at this machine pulling the lever all day long, right? And, showed her a picture of her back in the day, cute little thing and all that. And then here she comes, she's a little old lady, still real cute. And she goes, I never knew until today, until you told me what I was doing sitting at this machine. And I was here for 4 years. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
But that's the way we all are. I didn't know what I was doing sitting at that radar scope up in Baudette, Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I knew to do da-da-da, but I'm not putting this stuff together.
Yeah.
It's not till a year later I find out this all goes into, aerospace tracking, that we've got interceptors, that we're out looking for Bear bombers. If they come in, by God, we're going to get them. And we did.
Yeah.
So back then they would come into our airspace. But we don't expect this.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that in these military operations, deception is key. Absolute key.
Yeah.
One big one that I was a part of was during Desert Storm. Mm-hmm. There was a massive amount of Allied military that shifted way off to the west just before the ground attack began.
Yeah.
It's referred to as Schwarzkopf Hail Mary play.
Okay.
And we were totally screened. So the Iraqis didn't know what was going on. And we came up and we went north and then turned to the east. And our objective was to get to one of these elite units, the Republican Guard, which we did. Uh-huh. They never knew we were there, Mark. Never knew we were there. Totally deceived. They were absolutely, totally deceived.
Wow.
Unbelievable. But 2 things deceived them. The Marine Corps practicing their amphibious landings on the shores of Kuwait. Mm-hmm. And the 1st Cav Division, which is at Fort Hood, made a move up a fairly significant wadi, dry riverbed, up to the north, which was way to the east of this massive armor column.
Yeah.
So deception is there. We do it all the time. There's no reason to think that somebody who has bad intent is not deliberately trying to deceive us right now, and we need to check this stuff out.
Agreed.
As far as flat Earth goes, I'm
Well, let me put this to you then.
Yeah.
As far as life goes, because people have asked me, they've compared it to the atomic weapon program of the United States, where they hid this weapons program from everybody. Of course, we didn't have social media or internet or anything like that back then.
That reminds me of something. Go ahead.
Okay, but the question is, people said, could you actually keep this a secret? Could you actually hide this thing? I go, well, yeah, it's just a question of money and getting the right resources involved, and there's a military aspect of it, definitely, but it could be done. I'm absolutely 100% sure of it when I was building this model out. That it could be done. If I had to do it, I could do it. Now, you couldn't do it forever, but you could do it for a while, at least until the technology got to where we are now.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay.
Because I honestly believe that we are living in an age when the everyday woman, the everyday man, the everyday boy and girl can look at this stuff more critically than scientists of even a generation ago. And the reason I say that is because of these devices we carry called smartphones. Those things have got the knowledge of the Library of Alexandria on them.
Yeah.
You can look it up and you can find it. And there's a lot of junk on the internet,
of course.
But we're not looking for porn or to get a date or whatever.
Yeah.
The knowledge of the world is on those devices. We carry them in our hands.
Yeah.
And people have fought wars over this kind of knowledge.
Yeah.
And
now everybody's got access to it. Granted, you have to sift through it and try to figure out what's real and what's not.
And that's what I like about the community that we're a part of. You've got so many guys like all those guys over there on Globebusters.
Yeah.
Those are like smart cookies, man.
Yeah.
And they have got the wherewithal to do this. Notice you talk a lot, or sometimes I'd say a lot, about, well, this thing, it's going to mature, it's going to kind of break out.
Yeah.
And, and what's that going to be like? What I hope it's like is I hope it's the people that have got real capabilities. And I'm not talking about someone like myself. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have observations. Mm-hmm. But there are people that are doing these experiments that are real leaders, man, honestly.
Yeah.
And there are people in our current paradigm scientific community that are absolutely brilliant people.
Yeah.
And all we need to do is figure out really what is it we're on and where we at.
Yeah.
And we're getting there. I mean, I think we're getting there. I think it's going to break. It's going to be difficult for sure.
Yeah, I think it's still, the scientists, unfortunately, are, because not just because of the indoctrination, but just because of this huge fear of being ostracized from the academic world. I think the breakout point is still going to come either, from the military or the private sector. Somebody in the know. Somebody that's done something or knows somebody, maybe 1 or 2 degrees of separation that says, yeah, I flew the planes. I flew the 0G planes with the cameras on them.
Yeah, right.
And shot some of the footage. Or I was the guy that maintained the cameras. Or who knows, where it's exactly going to come from.
Hey, you got time for a funny story?
Yeah, we had 5 minutes. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I was up in Fairbanks, Alaska one time.
Good.
And I was working up there. And the reason I'm bringing this story up is somebody was talking, and I forget who, about, and I think it was the Globebuster guys.
Okay.
That they could easily, cart up a U-2 reconnaissance aircraft to make it look like the ISS.
Sure.
So I was up in Fairbanks one time, and I think this was around 1977.
Okay.
And I was working approach control up there. It's like in this little dingy basement. Mm-hmm. And so I'm working this one aircraft in, and it's got a NASA call sign, right?
Yeah.
NASA, whatever, and I see type aircraft U-2.
Yeah.
So I asked my boss, hey, man, can you relieve me? I want to go out and watch this thing come in and land.
Okay. So
I did. And so it came in, it was black, and it didn't have Air Force markings on it, it had NASA on it.
Interesting.
And on, thing, because they have to chase it with vehicles because, the thing falls over on its side.
Yeah,
Little wheels they got to put on there.
It's like a glider.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting that.
Yeah.
It turns out the pilot she was just there to get fuel. It was a woman.
Really?
Yeah, and we invited her over to the RACCON, we called it Radar Approach Control Facility, coffee and chat. And she told us a couple things. She said she was on the mission to go sample air over China because they had just exploded an above-ground nuclear device.
That's interesting.
And that's what she was doing, and that's what the airplane was for.
Huh.
And she said that she got a lot of shit over these operations because, excuse me, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's not FCC. You're okay.
Because, when you fill out your flight plan, right, some of it's classified, but, it's like how long's the mission? It's 8 hours or 12 hours. How much fuel on board in time?
Yeah.
And she puts 8 hours, and they're like, hey, shouldn't this be the other way around? She goes, no, man. They couldn't figure it out. And she just said, that's it. That's the flight plan. You take it. And she was telling us that she gets up there, turns the engine off, glides around.
Really?
Yeah.
That would explain the big wingspan.
So they've got, that's why, the flight time is greater than the fuel available in time. But here's the funny part of it.
Okay.
It's like, because she's sitting here drinking coffee. What do you got to do when you go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
She goes, I just go in my pants. We're like, what? She goes, I wear a diaper.
Adult diapers.
It wasn't adults. It was Pampers.
Really?
She said that Pampers were developed for the U-2 program. That's cool. And that they were a military secret until Gary Powers got shot down.
Wow.
That's they've been pulling our leg on this.
I don't think she was.
And that once that happened, then they came out and all the little kiddies got to wear them. But I just thought that was pretty interesting.
That is really interesting. Wow, that's really great. And it makes sense because that huge wingspan, I always thought, I was like, wow, that thing's big. The dimensions are like a glider. Yeah. Anyway, any final words before we head off into the sunset for you?
Mark, thanks for inviting me onto your program. It's a pleasure to speak with you, certainly.
Thanks.
And I'm happy to be part of the community, help any way I can. And these are just my observations over the years.
All right, man. We're going, hey, everybody treat others better than you treat yourself.